Hello, Star Trek fans, and welcome to Star Trek Prodigy, a ReBingeIt podcast. My name is James.
And my name is Kim, and we're watching and overanalyzing every episode of Star Trek Prodigy like true Star Trek geeks. Hit it! Welcome back to the podcast. Today we are on Season 1, Episode 18 already.
I know.
Today's episode is called Mindwalk, and it began streaming on Paramount Plus December 15th, 2022. The description from Paramount Plus is, desperate to warn Starfleet of their dilemma, a daring experiment goes awry as Dal inadvertently swaps minds with a Starfleet Vice Admiral. Wow, a Starfleet Vice Admiral. I wonder who that could be.
Yeah, it doesn't narrow it down much.
No.
So this is the Freaky Friday episode.
This is definitely that. You know, I gave last week's episode kind of a low rating, and I think it was for a number of reasons, but also we had a big cliffhanger in the previous episode where Janeway got knocked out, and then in the last episode, Ghost in the Machine, we never even saw Janeway. We don't know what happened to her, and I think maybe the fact that I already have problems with big cliffhangers, and then to have it drag out another week was sort of bothering me as being an unsatisfactory episode.
Yeah.
Well, we more than make up for it in this episode with a whole lot of Janeway crammed into a very short amount of time.
Yes, this is the Janeway episode.
This is your reward for being a Janeway fan and watching this show.
Oh, yeah.
Well, should we kick this one off?
Yes, let's get underway.
Well, we start where we left off last week with the Protostar cruising towards the Dauntless and the crew locked out of all the systems.
And remember last week's lesson, don't share your security codes.
That's right. Holo Janeway is horrified at what she's done. She doesn't even remember sabotaging them. She says she can't be here anymore. If she doesn't know what they're doing, she can't sabotage their efforts. So she disappears.
So the good version of Holo Janeway has enough control or independent thought that she can actually make that decision.
So far, yeah.
The Dauntless is hailing, which they can't answer. And as the ships pass close by, Dr. Noam on the observation deck can see the crew of the Protostar because they've got all that glass in the front of it, or whatever kind of technical see-through transparent aluminum they have.
Right.
Well, as he sees the crew, Murph starts blowing a raspberry at him.
I'm surprised they can get that close together to see each other, but I definitely laughed at Murph when he did that.
Murph expressing his feelings.
Especially to Dr. Noam, who's such a jerk.
Yes, it's totally appropriate. Well, Rock discovers that not only are they locked out of the systems, but the Protostar is powering up the warp drive.
On the Dauntless, Commander Tysus is trying to reach the Admiral, but she's not responding to her comm badge, because remember, the Diviner knocked her out like 2 episodes ago. We cut now to the Axis of Evil with the Vindicator, the Diviner, and Dreadnought, and the Vindicator is putting an unconscious Janeway into a closet. Naked Dreadnought here advises just throwing her out of an airlock, but the Diviner nixes the idea by saying, a missing admiral would bring unwanted attention.
Do you call it the Naked Dreadnought to differentiate between this one and the cloak-wearing version?
Well, they don't have names.
Yeah, they're just all called Dreadnought. Yeah,
exactly. They don't even have numbers.
That must get very confusing when you start talking about Dreadnoughts.
Yeah, when there's 2 in the room and you say, like, Dreadnought activate or deactivate, how do they know which one is supposed to do what?
Dreadnought, the one who likes cloaks.
You there in the cape.
Maybe that's the whole reason for the cape, yeah.
Maybe. So is this a clue here when the Diviner was saying don't throw Janeway out of the airlock? Was he already protecting her because she saved him? Or was he just being pragmatic?
I will lean towards he was actually protecting her from the other 2. I think it had already started. Yeah,
maybe. Although you could definitely also see that after 20 years of failure here, that he might be a little bit cautious in what to do next.
Yeah.
Though also, it could be, remember, he was supposed to have brain damage or have been damaged somehow by Zero. And even though now we're supposed to believe he's back to just being the Diviner, maybe that had an impact as well.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Maybe he's not as evil as he used to be.
Maybe not. Maybe some of the evil drained away.
Yeah.
Well, now the Vindicator orders Dreadnought to erase all details of this event and then presses the button on the back of her head, transforming back into Ensign Tahani.
Still not her name.
And she says, we will complete our mission.
On the bridge, we see the Protostar make the jump to warp, and Tysus orders to follow. At warp, Essentia suggests getting close enough to the Protostar to merge their warp bubbles. And as they do this, on the Protostar, Zero notes how interesting it is that they're doing this.
Zero gives an almost Spock-like, fascinating
I thought that was a really nice little touch.
Yeah.
They're doing something that's potentially dangerous or not in their interests.
Yeah.
And Zero is like, oh, fascinating that you can do that.
We talked about that a lot in the first half of the season where Zero could very much be either like an android or like a Vulcan. And we haven't seen quite as much of it in the second half, but that was definitely an example of it.
Oh, agreed.
Jankum here says, well, at least they're not shooting at us. But then, of course, they immediately start shooting at them. And he's like, oh, no.
Spoke too soon.
Gwen figures that they're trying to take out their shield so that they can board the Protostar. Rock comes up with some classic technobabble when she has this idea. She says we could reconfigure the deflector to emit a phased tachyon pulse to communicate. And then Jankum replies with, oh yeah, sure. Beep boop, beep boop, beep boop. Jankum doesn't know how to do that.
I feel that was the writers having a laugh at some of the ridiculous technobabble that certainly TNG was very good at. Well, all the Star Treks do that.
All the Star Treks give you the technobabble for sure. I mean, it seemed like a good idea. Anytime you're reconfiguring or bypassing in Star Trek, you're usually doing something good. So it's sort of disappointing that she has this idea, but then it's like, oh, it's too hard. Can't do it.
Right. Gwyn asks Zero if they can use telepathy to contact Janeway, but without the hive mind, Z is not strong enough to communicate that far. Rock and Zero figure out that Dal's augmented genome contains telepathic DNA, so together they could reach the ship. Dal tells them, I love trying new things, but let's do this fast.
I really liked it when he said that.
Yeah.
I love trying new things.
Dal and Zero hold hands and they start the process. All the while, the Protostar is being rocked by phaser fire from the Dauntless. Zero tells Dal, reach out across space and focus on Admiral Janeway to make contact with her. And we see a stunned Janeway on the Dauntless. And then a phaser blast rocks the ship, knocking Dal and Zero apart.
On the Protostar, Dal awakens with Murph staring him in the face, and they both scream. And Dal asks, what's going on? Jankum thinks Dal has lost his mind, but Zero says, this isn't Dal. And Dal stands and says, of course not. It's Admiral Janeway. I noticed she doesn't say Vice Admiral here, so maybe she's annoyed by the Vice title too.
Yeah, it's a little bit below her true rank.
Yeah. Anyway, we have a total Freaky Friday situation and a body swap has occurred.
Yes.
Gwen asks, if the Admiral's mind is in Dal's body, then Dal must be in, uh-oh.
Okay, that was great.
Yeah.
She knows Dal well enough to know what's going to be going on the other ship.
You immediately know that is going to be a problem.
I did like here when Dal Janeway, or is this Janeway Dal?
I think the one who's controlling the person, their name should go first.
Okay.
So this would be Janeway Dal.
Okay. So I like with Janeway Dal how his little tail is like flipping around at the back. Like she doesn't know how to control it.
Yeah, because it's kind of annoying her because it brushes on her face and she's like, oh.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. But when Dal is in his own body, the tail rarely moves.
Right.
Yeah, that was a good point.
On the Dauntless, Dal Janeway has come to and starts freaking out.
Yes.
And exits Essensia's quarters, where she was locked in the closet.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the Diviner comes in with restraints to handcuff Janeway and is shocked to find she's not in the closet anymore.
Where did Dreadnought go? I mean, I'd have thought he'd go back to being a table, or he would have at least kept an eye on Janeway.
That's a good point. Maybe when he's in table mode, he can't really control things.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe unless Ensign Tahani actually activates him, he is just a table. Or I was wondering, too, if maybe the Vindicator is a little bit more cautious and doesn't let Dreadnought just do whatever he wants. And so is sure that he is not active unless she's in the room. Otherwise, who knows what he would do? Yeah,
because he's all ready to start throwing people out the airlock.
He'd be throwing everybody out there. Yeah. He'd be walking down the hallway of the ship, just throwing people out the window. It'd be terrible.
That's a good take, that maybe she has to keep him more under control.
Yeah.
Huh.
Well, now one of the crew tries talking to the Admiral in the hallway. This is Dal Janeway. And this Dal version of Janeway says, oh, hello, Starfleet person,
yes.
while doing a terrible salute. They make a big deal about Dal also here not being able to walk in Janeway's shoes, and she keeps turning over her ankle. It's a slight heel, but this is a good example of why everyone should just wear flat, comfortable shoes, especially if you are working and you might have to run.
Yeah.
I always take note in Discovery that they have good footwear in that show, and there is a lot of running that they do. Maybe they would run more if they had shoes that they could run in.
Yeah, Starfleet needs sensible running shoes as part of the uniform.
But also, this really makes it visible that it's not Janeway because she can no longer walk in her shoes. So it's just another example of why heels are just a terrible idea. Well, the random crew member that Dal / Janeway ran into in the hallway reports to the bridge that he's found the Admiral, and then Janeway is immediately beamed to the bridge.
While Dal is shouting, "No!"
Yes. And on the bridge, Ensign Tahani is surprised to see her, of course, and starts to reach for her phaser.
Yeah.
But Dal / Janeway says, "Oh, nice to see ya," while winking and doing finger guns.
Oh.
Dal is an absolute embarrassment as Janeway, and the finger guns every time, it just killed me. And he did it like 3 or 4 times, and the winking.
Yeah.
Oh, it was so funny. I could only think of how much fun Kate Mulgrew must have had voicing this, because it's so funny.
Oh, yeah.
So Commander Tysus gives up the command chair, and Dal sort of sits in it, but then slides out of the chair before recovering. And when he sees that they're firing on the Protostar, he orders them to stop firing. And he's like, "Stop, cease, quit it." And then he tells Tysus to just follow them and find out where they're going. And then we can pew, pew, pew. And he does the finger guns again.
Yes. This should be raising some red flags.
Yes. And especially this next thing, too, because Dr. Noam brings Dal Janeway coffee and orders her to drink it. She takes 1 sip, then spits it out, saying, "How does she drink this stuff?" So now talking about herself in the third person is not a good sign.
Especially when you know how much Janeway loves coffee.
Yeah, right. I mean, I guess he didn't study Janeway, but he should know. Hollow Janeway's always walking around with a coffee cup.
If he'd been a bit smarter, maybe he could have covered with, "Is this instant?"
Or something, yeah. What I wrote down in my notes here is that Dal has no chill. Like, just chill out. You're freaking out, and you're making it obvious that you are not Janeway. But also, if they hadn't done that, it wouldn't have been as funny.
Yeah. But I also think that fits with Dal's character.
Oh, totally.
There is an element of Dal where he's a bit of a panicker.
Yeah, totally.
Well, back on the Protostar, it is the complete inverse.
Yes.
Janeway Dal has immediately settled into command, and they're looking at an image of the living construct. Gwyn tells her, all we wanted to do was return the ship.
Yeah, Janeway is sitting comfortably in the command chair. She's very calm. She's already got the entire story. She knows exactly what has happened. Yeah, she's doing what she should be doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Janeway tells them a good officer always keeps an open mind, and she was wrong about them. But to help them, she needs to get back to her ship and her body. And she asks, "So how do we fix this?" This was a great scene here because as she walks to the front of the ship and starts giving her little speech, they start playing a few bars of the Voyager theme. So... Again, something for the fans of Voyager. You instantly recognize it and go, "Oh!"
And it's just funny because it's Dal and Dal's voice.
Yes.
That was good.
Zero and Rock explain that they think the Organian DNA hijacked the telepathic link and caused the body swap. Zero and Janeway Dal attempt the telepathic link again, but it doesn't work. And she tells them they need to find the other variable and fast.
On the Dauntless, Ensign Tahani now is meeting with Dal Janeway, who asks, "What's your name again?" You could have asked the computer.
I believe she gives her correct name, Essentia.
Oy. Dr. Noam joins with a tricorder saying he's picked up cellular damage in Janeway's cerebral cortex. And Dal Janeway tries laughing it off, saying, "I'm just thinking really hard."
That is a perfect Dal line.
It's a very Dal line. Janeway pushes Noam out of the room onto the bridge and then points at Commander Tysus and says, "You, Antanas, you're in charge. Everyone else, you're doing an awesome job."
Yes.
And he leaves.
Teamwork makes the dream work.
Did he do the finger guns again here? I can't remember.
Yes, he did as the doors are closing.
So funny.
Oh, perfect.
I mean, this stuff is laugh out loud funny. It's hard to even explain how funny it was the first time through.
Oh, yeah. Especially with Janeway doing these wacky things that you would look at Dal and go, "Oh, yeah, that's Dal." But making Janeway do it, that's the trigger.
So funny. And it wasn't just that there was like sort of slapsticky, goofy stuff. What was funny about it was how it worked in the moment and how much you know about Janeway from watching Voyager and even from watching this show and how composed she is.
Yes.
And then to see her in her body being just so not composed. And at the same time, it's her exact voice.
Right.
I don't know what else to say or how else to describe it. It just worked so well.
Yeah. Essentia has determined the course of the Protostar. It's heading towards a restricted sector near Gamma Serpentis. She says, if it has a weapon, can we stop it alone? And Tysus tells her he will notify Starfleet Command to request all ships converge on that sector. Then as Essentia leaves the bridge, we get a close-up of her just smiling very gently as she enters the turbo lift.
A little evil smile.
Yes.
Back on the Protostar, Janeway Dal goes to see Holo Janeway, telling her it's me, Vice Admiral Janeway, in Dal's body. And she starts to rebuild Holo Janeway's program, purging it of the construct's influence. As she rebuilds the corrupted files, Holo Janeway gets her memories back, and we see a flashback of Chakotay as the ship is captured from him.
Yes.
And Janeway is like, oh, is he... Wants to ask if he's alive, but Holo Janeway doesn't know.
I like that she was able to rebuild the program. This is why having a very technical captain can be very useful.
Yeah, and she, again, just very composed, just took charge of it and just fixed it.
Yeah.
And when Janeway Dal comes into the room, she looks like Dal, but they do this cool thing where when she walks around something, I don't know, it was a pole or something in the room, she turns into Janeway so you can see her, so that you get that effect of Janeway talking to Janeway. And it totally gave me goosebumps. I had all the feels when that happened because I've been waiting for this moment.
Right.
And it was more effective to show her as Janeway.
Yes, it was a really nice storyline touch to do that. An excited Rock comes up with the name Admiral Dal.
Yes.
And then tells Admiral Dal they found a way to get her back. The transfer happened because with the Dauntless shooting phasers at the time of the telepathic link, a physical contact was created. So to swap back, they need to do the same thing again, except to do it, they need to be outside the ship.
Well, did they really need to be outside the ship, or was it just that they had no way of getting them onto the same ship?
Well, I think it's because they weren't shooting at them anymore, and they probably didn't want to shoot back.
No. Yeah, definitely not.
So,
yeah,
I think that was the rationale there.
Okay. I'm not 100% confident in this science.
It's Star Trek science. I am 100% with it. This totally makes sense.
Okay. All right. Next, we'll have an ion storm, and they'll end up in the Mirrorverse. But,
wow. Yeah. I'm going to advise them to look out for chronoton particles. That always ends up in trouble.
Yeah, definitely. Well, now Janeway Dal says, so you want me to exit a starship, at warp, by the way.
Yep.
Go to the middle of a warp bubble and make physical contact with my own body. And you think that she's going to say something like, that's a crazy idea. But instead, she's like, yeah, sure, no problem. Listen, I was once transformed into a salamander. Nothing can be as difficult as that.
Oh, an absolutely fantastic line delivered for all the Voyager fans, referencing the worst episode of Star Trek Voyager of all time.
One of the worst episodes of Star Trek of all time.
Yeah, that's right up there, isn't it?
I had to go read the plot summary to remind myself of it. I remembered what happened, but I just didn't remember the detail of it. So I had to go and look that up. But what a terrible episode. This might have been the biggest laugh that we had watching this.
Yeah, definitely.
If you've never seen it, you kind of miss that joke, but it's so tiny and it's so quick. It's not like it sucks up a lot of time. But again, this is an example of where when you watch the show, you are rewarded if you watched Voyager.
So my question here is, and this might contain spoilers, if Janeway is in the Delta Quadrant and they mention the Salamander episode, do you think she goes and visits her kids?
No. I do not think so. Well, maybe Tom is visiting them. This is a good example for me of when I can really tell that I'm connecting with the show and I'm really enjoying it. When it gets to the point where the characters are so, or maybe it's the actors are so comfortable in their characters and the writers have found their groove, I think is the word I'm looking for. And everything is just kind of clicking and they can make jokes and make little comments that you understand because you now understand these characters. Right. And they're a part of your life and you get it and you're watching the show for the characters. And that happened to me like when we watched that episode Parallels, which I think is in the last season of The Next Generation. And at the time, you and I talked about this, where we laughed at some of those things in that episode too are very funny. And you laugh because you understand the characters and what they're saying works.
Yes.
It's very similar here where the humor works not because we know the Prodigy characters so well, but because we know the Voyager characters so well and the story there. And once I at least get to that point with shows, I really connect with them. And then I find it almost hard to give up.
I'll add to your point there that I think we know Dal as a character well enough that the kind of goofy way he's behaving on the Dauntless, what he's doing there is true to the character.
Yes.
Dal has this sort of panicky side where he makes poor decisions or he can be just sort of goofy. So the writers are following the character that they've developed so far.
Yes.
And it doesn't feel out of place.
Absolutely. And we're invested. We're truly invested in their success. And so you care about what happens. And then you're exactly right. When you see them doing what you believe they would do, it makes you continue to invest.
Right,
so
exactly.
It's really impressive.
Yes.
Okay, let's move on, or we'll just keep raving about these things. You might have noticed by now that we did enjoy this episode.
Oh, yes.
So Murph spots Dal/Janeway on the viewing deck of the Dauntless above them, and they see that Dal/Janeway is signaling SOS in Morse code. Gwyn says they can use Morse code to tell him their plan, and Jankum replies that he's pretty sure SOS are the only letters that Dal learned.
That sounds like Dal as well.
Yes. So Janeway tells them of a game called Charades, which of course Rock Talk is like, ooh, a game. And then we go into a very funny scene where the Protostar crew is acting out the plan for Dal. And he does eventually figure it out, and he starts to dance and cheer right as Dr. Noam, Commander Tysus, and Tahani are all watching. Tysus wants to get her to sickbay immediately, but Dal/Janeway makes a run for it, which was a big mistake because she's immediately caught and subdued by a hypo spray from Dr. Noam.
Back to the Protostar, and Janeway Dal is preparing to leave the ship. Janeway promises to help them get into Starfleet, but she has to explain that augments were outlawed after the eugenics wars, so Dal will never be allowed into Starfleet, unless he changes his name to Bashir and pretends to be a doctor.
I don't remember if we talked about this or not in the episode where we learned that Dal was an augment, but yeah, augments are not allowed in Starfleet. But there was one exception, at least that I know about. There may have been more, and that was Dr. Bashir.
Right.
Although his dad had to go to jail for it, so maybe somebody just has to go to jail so that Dal can get in.
Oh, blame his parents. I mean, that's what we learned in last week's episode. Blame your parents.
That's right. Yeah, we learned that from Mahi.
The thing here is, I think this almost sort of continues the bigoted attitude that Starfleet / the Federation has against augments.
Mm-hmm.
Do they have a Department of Genetic Purity to make sure that nobody has any other DNA? What about a Klingon-human hybrid, like B'Elanna Torres? Are you going to exclude her from certain human things? Because even though she has significant human DNA, she would still have a lot of the strength of Klingons. Certainly has the temper of Klingon.
Well, and we've also talked on the other podcast quite a bit about what about manipulation for health reasons?
Yeah.
Where they're fixing something in your DNA to avoid you from getting some disease. So are you not allowed into Starfleet?
Right. A random genetic mutation.
I mean, I understand the sentiment, and I understand why they have implemented this. But perhaps instead of just banning it, they could have some kind of a review board or something to visit some of these cases. Because I don't know, otherwise it seems quite harsh. But again, I do understand. With the eugenics wars, it was bad.
Yes.
But Khan was cool.
His was superior.
Somebody tweeted at me, I think, saying we weren't taking Khan seriously enough. We take Khan very seriously. I mean, that chest alone, his hair, so serious.
Yeah, it's like he had the same tailor as Disco McCoy.
Without Star Trek Wrath of Khan, I don't know if I'm a Star Trek fan. I don't know. That was my introduction to Star Trek.
Oh.
And I love it so much.
Wow.
So I don't mean to imply I don't take Khan seriously. I do take him seriously, but it's also just part of the reason why I love Star Trek so much.
And the final thing in the scene after Janeway tells them that augments are basically outcasts in the Federation, Gwyn replies, "Wow, you people are as bad as my own. I'm calling the Dauntless. Let's get this mission over with."
No, that did not happen. Well, now Dal/Janeway is restrained in sickbay, but in a surprising moment, the diviner enters and sets her free, saying she saved his life, so he will do the same. Although he does say his mission is still important, so it's not like he's going to stop the mission.
Yeah.
But he says, if his mission fails, please protect my daughter. And Dal/Janeway says, I get it. I'd do anything for Gwen, too.
Wow.
Which kind of confuses the diviner here because he doesn't know he's talking to Dal.
That was somewhat surprising.
It definitely was, but we had clues that this was going to happen.
Yeah.
The diviner also tells her most of his life Starfleet was his sworn enemy, the villain that destroyed my world. Your kindness was unexpected. Was it really most of his life? I mean, he's been here 20 years. I guess we don't know how long their fights were.
Well, they made the reference decades, but neither he nor the Vindicator seemed terribly old when they did the flashback.
So it's weird for him to say most of my life, but okay, I'll buy it.
Well, I guess he could be a generation or two after the start of the war. Maybe this is part of the problem. He never knew Solum as it truly was. So he's living off the propaganda of one side or the other. That before the Federation turned up, everything was perfect. It was the good old days.
That does happen. People tell you something in the past was better than it is now. Guess what? It's always terrible. As soon as you pay attention, it's always terrible. That's my lesson for today.
Don't dig too deeply into history. You'll just go, oh.
Oh my God, it's so terrible. Well, somehow Dal Janeway manages to sneak into a spacesuit and get outside the ship. I don't know. It was awfully easy. And then, of course, when he gets outside of the ship, he discovers that he's on the wrong end and he has to walk all the way to the front of the ship.
And on the bridge of the Dauntless, they discover the Admiral is on the outside of the ship.
That was funny.
But they can't beam her back because of Star Trek reasons, interference or something. And finally, Dal Janeway makes it to the front of the Dauntless and is able to jump towards the Protostar.
Yeah, a true leap of faith.
Oh, absolutely. In the Protostar, Janeway Dal tells the others, when I get back, I'm going to fix this.
Oh.
Murph wraps himself around Janeway Dal and she jumps off the ship. As they start to get close, they're almost touching when the Dauntless turns on its tractor beam and starts pulling Dal Janeway back. Murph tries stretching as far as he can, but he's maxed out. And Janeway Dal says, this might sting a bit, and then uses a phaser to recreate the conduit that linked them. And we see the two consciousnesses swap over.
Consciousnesses. That's not a word you would expect to say. So Dal now awakes to Murph again, but this time he's back to himself. On the bridge, an alarm sounds, and Jankum reports they're dropping out of warp in Federation space. And Dal says, and that's one heck of a welcome party. And we see a whole fleet of Starfleet vessels in front of them, with more dropping out of warp every second.
Back on the Dauntless again, and Admiral Janeway is waking up. She comments, it did sting a bit, and then says, oh no, as she's locked in the brig behind a force field and guarded. The end.
She must have just gone, Dal, dude, what did you do?
Yes. I did a quick count, and there are like 40 ships, including the Dauntless. There might have actually been more.
That is very like you to try to count all the ships on the screen. I just went, wow, there's a lot. All right, let's talk about the things that stood out in the episode. I think the first thing I will say is that we've spent a lot of time already talking about the things that stood out. Certainly the humor and our deep knowledge of Janeway that we already had.
Yeah.
That was a humongous part of this episode.
Agreed.
We don't have to rehash it here, but that, if I look back on this episode a year from now, that's what I'll remember.
Other things that stood out is Dreadnought is pretty ruthless.
Dreadnought is very ruthless, yes.
He does not have an ethics circuit, I'm pretty sure.
No, he certainly doesn't. He is just on mission and trying to complete it, and I think we saw that as well with the other Dreadnought. Yeah. Darth Dreadnought. But yeah, they're not people. That's my deep analysis. The robot dude is not people.
Very in-depth there.
Thank you.
Another thing that stood out, I thought where all the ships were appearing at the end, where they were all dropping out of warp, it really reminded me of Parallels, where
when all the enterprises appeared.
Yes, where they're all appearing from the different parallels and they're all just like popping into space.
That's the second time we mentioned Parallels in this episode. And there's a few other times, I think, here and there where a bunch of ships appear, right? Yeah. But yeah, it was quite dramatic there. That salamander comet absolutely stood out. That's just a notorious episode.
Yeah.
So it's almost like something maybe they would have brought up in Lower Decks. But
right.
Yeah, but it worked here.
This does actually feel like it could be a Lower Decks episode.
Not as goofy, though.
No.
It was much more serious. And like I said, because we're so invested in the characters here, it was easy to just see the humor in it and not take it as a joke.
Yeah, Lower Decks, it would have been played much more for humor.
Much more for the joke, yeah. Well, I think certainly the Diviner's actions stood out.
Oh, yeah.
Because now he's not pure evil, and whether or not it's because of the effects from Zero or he actually always had a conscience, I guess we don't know that yet. Something else that stood out to me is we've seen on this show many times where the characters have, at least in the beginning, they were very cautious with adults. And now they have been really clinging to adults as maybe role models. Maybe Hollow Janeway helped that happen.
She is a good role model.
And we saw it even with Okana. They were sort of clinging to him, but of course he let them down.
Yeah.
And then when Hollow Janeway, that adult role model that they finally were respecting and listening to and felt like, the hologram cared about them, which is a funny thing to say.
Trustworthy at the least.
Oh, trustworthy, absolutely. And then they find out that she was sabotaging them. How horrible. What a terrible moment to again shake their confidence in their adult role models. But just when that happened, the real Janeway turns up. And she is exactly what they needed in that moment.
Yeah.
And that sort of parental way that Janeway is dealing with them, that stood out to me as well.
Yeah, that's a pretty good observation. I would agree with that. And I think my final point here is we still haven't fixed the ship. It's still under the control of the construct.
Yeah, so it could lower its shields and start hailing everything. Yeah.
And even Janeway wasn't able to override it or get around it.
Good point. Well, let's move on to character development. Did we learn anything new about our characters this week?
I definitely think we've learned that there's a side to the diviner that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm wondering if they're leading the diviner towards a revelation that what he's been told about Starfleet, the propaganda from his side, is lies.
Yeah.
He's been brought up on a diet of the Federation being evil. And all of his actions, all the terrible things he did on Tars Lamor, his complete suspension of any kind of morality, is to complete this mission to save his people from a truly evil race that would destroy them, where the reality is that they destroyed themselves and the Federation is not the enemy.
Gosh, I really like that view. I hope that's what's happening.
Yeah.
That we've talked about this before on a different podcast where sometimes when you just stay in your own house and you only hear the voices of the same people all the time, you end up just repeating what those people are telling you. You don't get your own ideas about things. It's part of the reason why it's good to sometimes move out and go and live your own life away from what's being told to you so that you can make your own decisions. And I hadn't thought about that because the diviner, as we first see him, at least, he seems quite old. But I hadn't thought about that. That's absolutely what could have happened. And now he's finally been exposed to what Starfleet really can be. And he's going, wait a minute.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe this is jumping to speculation. I'm going to make a jump that would be the true Star Trek story.
That would be a true Star Trek story. There is no doubt.
Picard gives his speech.
Yep.
The alien race that appears negative or evil or destructive suddenly goes, hey, you're right.
These guys are okay.
Yeah. It doesn't always work like that, but redemption is an important theme.
That is really, really good. I like that a lot. Something that's a little sad for Dal here is that he didn't really get a chance to be with Janeway.
Oh.
He was in Janeway's body, but he didn't get her sage advice. He didn't get to have a conversation with her like everybody else did.
Right.
We had that scene between the real Janeway and Hollow Janeway. Hopefully, she imparted enough wisdom into the hollow version of herself to help Dal some more in the future. Because when she's talking to that version of herself, she's talking about how she knows that she'd be blaming herself in the same situation.
Right.
I think she says beating herself up. It was a very meaningful scene, but maybe Dal can get some of that through the hologram.
And my final piece of character development is I already think Gwyn might have a problem with being racked with guilt about the things she did.
Yeah.
About being manipulated by her father.
Right.
And now you've dumped on her, Dal can't join Starfleet. He's an augment.
Yeah.
So you've given her something else that, does she tell Dal? Does she keep it from him? You've got something that either way is going to be bad for Dal and load some more guilt on her.
And with no other info, it's like, oh no, he can't get in.
Right.
Agreed. I put this in this section, but I'm not sure it fits here. But I think maybe what I learned the most was what an incredible voice talent Kate Mulgrew is. I think I said in the last episode, right at the end, what a great job she did in just delivering that line when she finds out that as the hologram, she had betrayed the crew.
Yes.
And she does such a great job just in that little tiny moment. But then I'm rewarded with this episode where she is just so incredible from start to end.
Oh, agreed.
So it's not really character development, but Kate Mulgrew development.
Yes.
Okay, anything else under character development?
That's it for me.
Lots of action, not so much character digging this week. But let's then talk about how did this week's episode work as a kid's show and hear from our 7-year-old correspondent, Mahi.
I'm a little bit worried we're going to get overanalyzed by a 7-year-old again.
Oh, she did overanalyze us last week.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens.
Hi, Mahi. Did you enjoy the episode? Yes, I enjoyed the show very much. Lots of things happened in this episode that I really liked. First, Vice Admiral Janeway now knows the complete truth about the Protostar, the crew, and the weapon. Hopefully, she can help now. Also, Del Rey is now telepathic. He can contact minds directly. Hologram Captain Janeway has all her memories back. And also, 2 Janeways met for the first time. The not-so-great but strange parts, like the diviner acting all weird and kind, as well as the Protostar being in the Federation space with all the Starfleet ships surrounding them, was interesting to see. I wonder what will happen next. I love the game of charades too.
What was your favorite part?
My favorite part of the episode was when the diviner helped Vice Admiral escape. Although I was very surprised, the diviner seemed to believe that you get what you give. Admiral Janeway saved the diviner's life, and he returned the favor at the right time. They both care a lot about Gwen, too.
Is hologram Captain Janeway really fixed?
No, I don't think hologram Captain Janeway is fixed, but she has all her memories back. I am sure she can now protect herself from being controlled by the weapon by using her memories. Even if the weapon is trying to make her do not-so-good things, she can stop herself from doing it. As she remembers, she is on the crew's side.
How will Dal handle not being allowed into Starfleet?
Dal is going to be very upset and sad to know that augments are not allowed in Starfleet. Dal was the one member of the Protostar who really wanted to join Starfleet.
Was there a lesson?
Del Rey and the team thought out of the box to contact Vice Admiral Janeway on the Dauntless. So when in a tricky situation, we should think out of the box to find a new way out. You can always communicate using charades with your friends when you can't talk loudly. Very useful in class if you don't want to get into trouble talking. I also learned that coffee doesn't seem to taste very good. Don't know why grown-ups even drink it. Coffee drills, milk rules.
Thank you, Mahi.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for your feedback as ever, Mahi.
Yep, and we always hear what Mahi learned from the episode. And of course, I've already said what I think the lesson is, and that's that bad shoes can ruin everything.
That's a good lesson. Yeah.
Yep. It's so true, too. All right, let's move on to feedback. We did get a couple pieces of feedback this week. I'll let you do Davia.
Davia writes, "This was an unexpected solution to the problem of the Protostar unable to communicate with Starfleet. I loved how this solution was set up, even though unexpected. Admiral Janeway meeting the kids earlier pays off here.
Yep.
Dal being an augment also pays off. The interaction with Holo Janeway and Admiral Janeway was great. Dal is true to himself, no matter the body he inhabits. The animation here was great. Though it worked against our crew, it was good to see the Dauntless's doctor, then the crew noticing the odd behavior and acting accordingly. It will be fun to see Admiral Janeway get out of this jam. I hope it's in time to save the crew."
I assume it's in time since there's a season 2.
Now we have Brian M. from Talk Through Media. Over to you, Kim.
So Brian says, I haven't been leaving feedback, but I wanted to this week after a couple of episodes that I didn't love. Oh, interesting.
Aha.
This episode was a solid 9.5 out of 10 and was probably my favorite of this half season so far. They seem to be making the rounds of Star Trek tropes and putting a Prodigy spin on it. I thought Kate Mulgrew and the animators with their performance of Dal Janeway, it was so good. I was surprised that the diviner set Janeway free. I read that the character was inspired by Khan, and I guess that is one way that they would be similar. I could see Khan do that. I can't see Ensign, name of an ensign that I don't recognize when you say it all the time, Kim, Essentia / the Vindicator, doing that if the roles were switched.
No.
Big cliffhanger again this week. I'm looking forward to next week's episode. So just to clarify what I am saying instead of what the Vindicator's name is, and because I couldn't remember in the first episode, is Ensign Tahani, Tahani, and that's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, you're not letting that one go.
It's too funny to me now.
Oh, dear.
Did we hear from Cal E this week?
Another short one from Cal E this week, who writes, "Body swap. Classic Trek.
All right, that is it for the written feedback. Let's go to Jeff X-Force 11.
Hello, Star Trek fans. It's Jeff X-Force 11 leaving my feedback about Prodigy Mindwalk. This was fun. I was wondering how they were going to communicate the information from the Protostar to Janeway. And now Janeway knows it. Of course, nobody's going to trust her now. And that's a major issue. So, wow, this was a very cool episode of Janeway clearing up Hala Janeway's control pathway so that she's free again, and getting to see Janeway interact with the crew. And I just loved it because it just seemed so true to her character and what we've seen, even the fun joke about being turned into a salamander and that infamous episode of Voyager. This episode was just great. I'm really curious to see how they are going to close out this season. All right, those are my thoughts. X-Force is out.
Thank you, Jeff, for your very positive feedback of the episode.
Yeah, and I think we agree with everything you said,
Yeah.
and we had very similar feelings. All right, let's move on to the trekkiness of this episode.
Mind meld gone wrong, consciousness transfer, possessing somebody else's body. So Trekky.
Yeah, all those themes are definitely Trekky. Also, the technobabble
Oh, that's a good one.
was Trekky.
Yep.
And a questionable scientific solution. Yeah, that counts too.
That's 100% Trek.
All the Voyager references, of course, gave it quite a Trek feel. And the thing I said earlier about once we get to know these characters, then all those callbacks to history become more meaningful and certainly gives it more of a Trek feel.
Oh, agreed. The hint of the Voyager theme playing when Janeway is standing in front of the construct.
Yep. And the way it closed out with all those ships appearing.
Oh,
The Starfleet ships.
yes, definitely. The fleet arriving to solve a problem.
This entire episode definitely felt like it was written by people who love Star Trek.
Oh, agreed.
Yep.
This draws from so much Star Trek lore. It's very impressive.
How about any Star Warsiness in this episode?
I didn't really see it.
No, I didn't take note of anything. So I guess before we do a little speculating about what's to come in the last two episodes, we can go to rating. What do you give Mindwalk out of 10?
10. Fantastic. Such a good episode. Funny. Progresses the story. All the characters were great. The two voice actors, Brett Gray and Kate Mulgrew, clearly enjoyed doing the opposite versions of their characters. Mulgrew being this agent of chaos is the best way of describing Dal. And then Gray doing this Admiral version of Dal, who is very on point, understands things. Really well done. So much fun in this episode. Really enjoyable watch. And a rewatchable episode as well.
Yeah, I only got to watch it twice this week, but I look forward to watching it again. Well, I think I'm going to give it a 10.
Wow.
I absolutely loved it. It was fun. It was funny. I liked what happened with the characters. I liked what happened with the story, and it set us up for the big finale.
Yeah.
It wasn't a super dramatic episode, and honestly, normally the big drama is what I end up liking, and that wasn't here. So I keep thinking to myself, maybe there's some big drama to come that is going to make me want to give, that episode a 10 plus. But why play that game? I loved it. It was great.
Fantastic.
Well, let's move into Speculation Corner. Since there are only 2 episodes left, we are very near the end of this story. We spent a lot of time last week talking about how we think that the Protostar and the crew is going to get thrown to a different timeline, whether in the past or the future, probably the future, somewhere where Chakotay is.
Yeah.
But how do we think Janeway is going to get out of the brig? Do you have an idea?
I'm going to speculate that Janeway's going to end up going with them.
To the future?
Yes.
And then she won't be in Picard?
Yeah, she'll come back for Picard.
Oh, she'll come back. Okay.
After rescuing Chakotay.
I don't think that she's going to go with them.
Yeah, because they have the hollow Janeway.
Yeah, I don't think that that's what will happen. I do wonder if the diviner might sacrifice himself in some way to save everything.
Yeah.
I think that would be the ultimate redemption for that character.
Yeah. That would work. Maybe Janeway disobeys orders, goes against Starfleet, as she had multiple times in Voyager,
Sure.
and actually work with the diviner to maybe get the ship into the future. to save Chakotay, to get them back to the Diviner's world.
Hopefully, they also told Janeway about the story of Solom.
Yeah.
And why this was happening. And so she's got all that info, because all it should take is a change to the way that Starfleet interacts with that race in the future.
Yeah.
So if that happens and then they somehow end up in the future, everything could be very different for Solom.
That's true. So they could end up with a different future.
They could. But there's nothing to say, even if Starfleet doesn't make first contact or that particular ship, there's nothing to say it might not happen again or someone else does it. Yeah.
What happens if the Klingons make first contact, or the Breen, or the Cardassians?
Yeah, or somebody not in the Federation like the Cardassians. Yeah. Voyager.
I'd like to see Voyager find them. That could be pretty interesting.
I almost feel like on this show, they've done such a good job of really surprising us from episode to episode.
Yeah.
I hope they surprise us again, even though we've got some thoughts about what we think might happen. I mean, come on, Prodigy writers, knock us out.
Well, they've done a very good job so far, so...
Totally agree, yeah.
I could also see Ensign Essentia
Tahani
causing the demise of the Diviner.
I could see that too. I was wondering whether or not she, the Vindicator, makes it to the next season.
Yeah.
She might be one who ends up being flung back to the future, or she might get killed in some way. But I was wondering if she's going to stick around as a character, because what would happen to her? She can't obviously stay as the Vindicator unless something really changes and we find out that, everything goes back to normal or they fix all the problems in the timeline. But how would she know that if she's in the past and it happens in the future? So I don't know that she has a storyline.
To quote Mars O'Brien, when it comes to all these kind of temporal problems, I hate temporal mechanics.
Yes. Well, I don't have any other speculation for now. I'm just excited to get to the next episode and see what happens.
I can't wait to see where we go from here.
Yep.
It's all up in the air.
All right, that wraps up Season 1, Episode 18. I guess come back next week for Episode 19. But before we wrap up, I want to let you know that James and I can always be reached at RebingeIt@gmail.com and also on Twitter and Instagram at RebingeIt.
You can also listen to our Deep Space Nine podcast called ReBinge Deep Space Nine, available everywhere you get your podcasts, and on YouTube at RebingeIt.
And if you want to hear us talk about women in the future, that's the place to go.
It's a very popular section.
It is. To contact us for Prodigy or even be a part of the show if you'd like, you can join the Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/Star Trek TTM podcasts. You can also leave audio and written feedback at talkthroughmedia.com/feedback, or you can just email us at RebingeIt@gmail.com. Lots of ways to get in touch. Talk Through Media also has a Patreon, which supports all of the podcasts in the network, not just ours. And that is patreon.com/Star Trek TTM.
That's it for this week. Come back next week to hear the ReBinge It crew take on a new episode of Star Trek Prodigy.
That's it for me.
And that's it from me.
Oh, and listen to Janeway, unless your Janeway is corrupt.
And don't be a Borg.